When it comes to Canadian war history, there are few people that know more than this guy, Ted Barris. Welcome to Pembroke. Welcome to the Pembroke Memorial Center. And it's just great to have you on tonight during our hockey broadcast.
Thanks, Jamie. It's great because this morning I played old-timers hockey at about 8 o'clock in my hometown in Uxbridge, hit the road, and now I'm bookending the day here with you guys, watching the Lumber Kings play and enjoying a little bit of conversation about a time that most people forget except around November the 11th. Wartime experiences and wartime hockey, which is something that you and I are kind of keen on. One of the stories I was thinking about as you were inviting me up here this evening, many, many years ago I did a lot of research on the training of aircrew that happened all across Canada in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. And often, as a bit of a recreation, the Air Force guys would get together with the Army guys or the Navy guys and play hockey, and particularly in the Maritimes, for example. And inevitably, there would be the rivalries between the Army and the Navy or the Air Force and the Navy, whatever it was. And there were all these fights breaking out throughout the games. The only way they could stop the guys from fighting was to suddenly strike up the band and have them play the national anthem, or God Save the Queen, or something, the King, I guess. So I think one night they were playing in Debert in Nova Scotia, and I think they played the national anthem 12 times to break up the fights.
Well, Canadian soldiers had a reputation for being tough, so I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah.
You've written a lot of books, 22 plus now. The latest, the Battle of Britain, of course, which was really about the Nazi air attack and how the Allies had to fight that off, and Canadians played a major role in that. And your new book, and you've written some really interesting stories, history that would have been lost had you not written about it. Tell us about that. That was a significant battle in World War II.
Yeah, it was. And because it was so early in the war, it was 1940, 113 days from July the 10th to October the 31st, 1940. And it was crucial because if we hadn't been able to thwart the Luftwaffe and the attempted invasion of the British Isles, it would have a whole different picture. I mean, in effect, Churchill would have had to run the war from Ottawa, because they were fleeing, literally, because England was the last domino, and in the Battle of Britain, they needed everybody. And there were, in addition to about 2,500 ground crew and pilots of British origin, there were 147 Poles, there were 101 New Zealanders, there were 87 Czechs, there were 7 Americans, and there were 300 Canadians. We were the second largest contingent in the Battle of Britain, ground crew and pilots. And some of the squadrons that scored the highest were those that were populated by Canadian pilots.
Well, we're next door to Garrison Petawawa, one of the larger operational bases in the country. This great old building that you're in is 73 years old. It was built to remember the war dead from the Pembroke area in World Wars I and II. It's a great old rink. What's your first impression?
Well, when you took me around on my first time here a couple of years ago and you showed me some of the faces and that memorable game from 1951, I see the list of players who were here that night for the opening night in 51. It was a who's who of the Canadiens. Both Richards were here. Boom Boom Geoffrion was here. Doug Harvey. Elmer Locke. And a guy I didn't realize had played for the Canadiens, Bert Olmsted. And I remember being in Maple Leaf Gardens watching number 16, skating up and down the ice in Maple Leaf blue and white. But that night must have been incredible here because the war was only a few years past, 6 years after the war. And so the memory of the kind of losses, and many of the young men who had played in the NHL or in the feeder teams signed up immediately. I remember there was a moment in about 1942 when the Kraut line from Boston, which was Milt Schmidt, Bobby Bauer, and Woody Dumont. And they
Good for you, because I was trying to remember the names, and I'm a Bruins fan, but I knew the line for sure.
They all signed up. And, of course, that depleted the ranks of the regular players for the NHL Boston Bruins. And somebody, I think Schmidt said that the best line today, after they all left, the Kraut line left to go overseas, wouldn't have even made the third line in the Boston Bruins at the time. So that's the damage that it did to the play. But, of course, the greater damage were those who were lost overseas during the war.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that. So there's the Giesebrecht family is a family you may not be familiar with, but good hockey family, 6 boys, 5 of them playing professionally. Roy Giesebrecht was playing for the Detroit Red Wings from 1939 to 1942. He's part of that Detroit team that blew the 3-0 lead to the Leafs that came back to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Roy walked away from a hockey career to serve in Europe, and he served until the end of the war. Conn Smythe, of course, did that as well twice, World War I, World War II. So it wasn't that uncommon. It's a different world now. They weren't making that much money, really, and they had this dedication to serve their country.
Yeah, and the other thing that happened, too, as I'm sure you know, Jamie, was that during those years that those great players we think of from that era, the Richards and the Bert Olmsteads and the Ted Lindsays and so on, they were being paid a pittance.
They were.
And they were paying the penalty of tremendous harm to their bodies. They weren't wearing helmets. They weren't wearing masks. The padding was so thin, and yet they were being paid so little. And then suddenly when the war ended and the emphasis changed from the owners making the money to the players making the money, that's when the birth of the NHL Players Association began, and the sort of the players' rights and their chance to make better money and get compensation that they deserved. And it was really post-war that happened.
Ted Lindsay, by the way, originally from Renfrew. So
just
so you know that, and he was a guy, of course, that started really the unofficial Players Association.
Yeah.
Alan Eagleson, of course, gets credit for that years later when it was officially formed. We'll just close out this as we just, look at this great old building. There aren't many of these buildings left that were built as memorials, and I often refer to this as the museum because the history is so rich here.
You can smell it.
You can.
You can. You walk around here and you have that. It's the popcorn. It's the perspiration. It's the players. It's just that atmosphere that just makes you feel it from top to toe.
I'll give you one last little bit of trivia. 1954, the Chicago Blackhawks held their training camp here.
Wow.
That's how rich the history is in this place.
That's why it's called Hockey Town.
That's right. And it is a memorial to our area's war dead. And that's pretty special.
Thank you for inviting me in. It's been great to remember where the teams were, where the players were, and the sentiment for the concern and service that the players and everybody had at the time, and how it should be recognized and remembered.
Thanks very much. Ted Barris, war historian, author of 22 books, and in town here in Hockey Town, Canada tonight, enjoying this Lumber Kings game with the Hawkesbury Hawks with us up here in the Bill Kay Broadcast Center. The Lumber Kings lead the Hawkesbury Hawks 3-1 after the first period. We'll be back with period number 2 in just a few moments here on your TV.